Washington Journal continues.
And we are back with Congressman Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, talking about the strategy against ISIS. Are we at war here?
I think we are. Look, I think when people are killing Americans, when they threaten your homeland, when they say their long-term aim is to strike the United States, and they want to carve out what effectively would be a terrorist state in the middle of a very volatile region, then yes, I think we are at war. And frankly, administrations use that term. Struggle a little bit, but both the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State have used that, and so I think we are.
There's been briefings up on Capitol Hill with members of Congress from the White House to explain the strategy, to explain this threat of ISIS. We've got a call this morning that's saying, I don't see the evidence. Someone needs to explain to me why ISIS poses a threat to the United States.
Well, I think, first of all, the evidence is pretty grisly evidence. We've had 2 American journalists who were executed. We've had, a terrorist movement move out of Syria into Iraq, taking over most of the old Sunni areas. And again, its pronounced intention is to strike at the United States. It's not dissimilar to what we saw with the Taliban hosting, in their case, al-Qaeda in the 1990s, and that eventually resulting in a strike on the United States. So I don't think there's much question about how dangerous this group is. And by the way, it doesn't just pose a threat to us. I mean, there's a reason why the United States was able to very quickly assemble an alliance and to get 5 of the Arab states to participate, something that is somewhat unusual. So I think people that have a stake in the region, those there and beyond, have a common understanding. This really is a dangerous group, and it's growing and multiplying, if you will, much faster than anticipated. I think the other thing that people sometimes forget that is new is the number of foreign fighters here that hold foreign passports and their ability to travel. That is something that is almost incalculable in terms of the damage it could cause. People going there being trained and radicalized, fighting, and then eventually returning to their home countries to commit atrocities there.
Politico reporting this morning with this headline that the White House has met twice with congressional aides on ISIL. And part of that conversation that keeps coming up in these meetings is, should Congress be voting on a new war authorization? You say we're at war, so should Congress be voting on a new war
Absolutely.
authorization?
I don't think there's any question. I've tried to make that abundantly clear in my remarks on the House floor and my statements. Look, I don't buy, although some people do, I don't buy the White House position that 2001 and 2002 authorizations, both of which, by the way, the president has asked to be repealed in the past, actually give him the direct authority. But let's just assume they do. There's no question that the institution of Congress would be better off if it voted on a new authorization, repealing the old ones in the process. No question, I think, that the president would be better off. It would demonstrate to the world he has bipartisan support. And finally, the country would be better off, because I think some of this uncertainty about what to do is the absence of a debate. This thing overtook us in the course of the summer, at least in a public awareness sense. And so I think people are still trying to digest all the information, but a good, robust debate would be a good thing, not a bad thing for the country.
I want to show you and our viewers what the Speaker of the House had to say on Sunday on where this is headed. Here is John Boehner.
If the goal is to destroy ISIS, as the president says it is, I don't believe the strategy that he outlined will accomplish that.
Why not?
At the end of the day, I think it's going to take more than airstrikes to drive them out of there. At some point, somebody's boots have to be on the ground. That's the whole point. Listen, the president doesn't want to do that. If I were the president, I probably wouldn't have talked about what I wouldn't do. And maybe we can get enough of these forces trained and get them on the battlefield, but somebody's boots have to be there.
And if no one else will step up, you would recommend putting American boots on the ground?
We have no choice. These are barbarians. They intend to kill us. And if we don't destroy them first, we're going to pay the price.
I know you've said that...
Congressman Tom Cole, are you in agreement with the Speaker? That
Oh, I am. I absolutely am. I think he laid out the situation pretty clearly. Look, I think we've had an evolving strategy. We know some of the elements of it. Clearly, we're using air power now. We are building alliances. We are arming and training people in the region. I agree with the Speaker that I think it was unwise for the President to take the option of boots on the ground off the table. I think you certainly are going to want to use special operators in the way that we did against Osama bin Laden or as spotters and what have you. You just don't ever telegraph to the enemy everything you're going to do. In terms of the President's strategy not being sufficient, I think, again, we all hope it is. This is a preferable course if it can work, but that's a very big but. We don't have, our friends, quote, in Syria, who are pretty uneven lot. I mean, there's good elements and bad elements, but I think everybody would say in a three-way civil war, they've been the weakest of the three parties. So the idea that they can get the job done there, which eventually you're going to have to do, I think is questionable. In Iraq, it's a much better circumstance. We have an allied government there that, fortunately, I think the President was very wise in withholding support until that government changed. I mean, I think that's something he's not getting enough credit for in this discussion debate. But they have an army. There's the Kurds, who are actually technically part of Iran, but increasingly acting as independent actors in the region, and with their forces, the Peshmerga, they've demonstrated they can and will fight. They just simply need the weapons that ISIL has. So, complex situation.
Latest poll from CNN: Americans back airstrikes, but oppose the use of U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. To be clear, you would support, if the strategy required it? If the strategy requires it, yes. Troops. Because I think you go to war not just to demonstrate that you can hit people from the air, but to win the conflict. And look, I would prefer that not happen. Clearly the President would prefer that it not happen. But if you get to the point that that's the only way you can win, then I think it's very difficult to win wars with air campaigns. This is not Libya. This is not that kind of situation. And that, by the way, didn't turn out particularly well anyway. So I think you recognize if it's a danger, you may have to use your own forces, if only to convince other people to do it too. So again, I wouldn't recommend operating alone or unilaterally. We're not. If we can do it some other way, that would be preferred. But at the end of the day, again, I don't think you rule out what you're going to do to be successful in a war. All right, let's get to calls. Beverly is up first in Chicago, Democratic caller. Hi there.
Good morning. Give me a couple of seconds to get this in. Two things. When President Obama came out a few weeks ago and made us a heartfelt speech about two of the guys that got beheaded, he left the stage and went back, and you all said he played golf. You all beat him up. You talked about his suit. Fast forward to now. Everybody is saying ISIS is such a big threat. Lindsey Graham said that if we don't do something right now, they're going to come over here and behead all of us. I need to ask you something, then another question, and I'm off of here. Why is it, if this is as important that you all say it is, why aren't you all back in Washington? Because after all, you all are still on payroll. You're going to take this up 5 weeks from now. So if you can wait 5 weeks to take this up, you don't have to wait for President Obama. You don't wait for him to do anything else. And when he asks you to do something, you don't do anything.
Okay, Beverly, let's take that point and have the Congressman respond.
Well, there's quite a few points there. First of all, I didn't say anything critical about the President after he went out and played golf. But I think the President himself acknowledged that probably was not the appropriate thing to have done. And he wishes he had done it differently. I take him at his word. Look, that's just the way it is. Second, in terms of your point about why aren't we here, I think we should be here. And frankly, I wish the President would call us back. Normally, the way this is done, when presidents want to use force, is they submit a resolution to the Congress of the United States, and we come back and debate it. So far, the President said he would welcome that, but he hasn't asked for it. Third, the only reason why we had a vote at all in the House was because the House Republican Conference and the Speaker insisted on it. I mean, so far, the reality is most Democrats have wanted to avoid the issue. They don't want the vote. It actually divides both parties. It is a very politically difficult vote to cast, but I think you owe it to the country to do it.
Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, sits on the Intelligence Committee. He tweets this out. Speaker Boehner saying he can't bring up war authorization is cop-out of all cop-outs. Constitution empowers Congress alone with this power.
Well, that's very nice to say, but the reality is presidents ask us to go to war. That's the way it's worked traditionally. This president thinks he has sufficient legal authority. Frankly, the Speaker thinks he has sufficient legal authority under the 01 and 02 resolutions. I don't. but other people do, and plenty of attorneys argue it that way. I think the real question here is, Democrats wanting to avoid the debate. I know for a fact that the Speaker advised the President, please, ask for a resolution. I think it's better for you, better for the Congress, better for the country. The people that oppose that have been largely Democrats. Harry Reid has not wanted to have this debate with the Senate hanging in the balance. I think, frankly, Leader Pelosi has not wanted to have this debate. We ought to have it. It's here.
Well,
so,
if Republicans want to have it, if the Speaker wants to have it, then he could use his power and bring it back.
That's up to the Speaker. But if if the Senate isn't going to come back, you don't declare war with one house of Congress. And so the idea that it's the Speaker, as opposed to the people who've actually opposed this debate, the Speaker said he's open to it. He's asked the President to submit a resolution for it. The President says, well, gosh, it'd be nice if you guys said some nice things, but I really don't need you, and I'm going ahead and doing the action. Now, I doubt Adam and I are very far apart in what we believe ought to occur, but it does take some leadership around the table. So far, the only vote we've had has been one that John Boehner got for us. It wasn't one that the President actually would have sent us to Syria, involved us there with no vote whatsoever. He just asked that be dropped into the continuing resolution. And Harry Reid is consistently opposed to having a vote. So, I think the people that are thwarting a congressional discussion here are largely Democrat, not Republican.
If that was important for the Speaker to have that vote on arming and training the Syrian rebels, wouldn't it then logically make sense for the Speaker to do the same on these airstrikes in Syria, in that he would say, this is where the Republican Party stands?
It's not important for the Speaker, it's important for the country. And frankly, again, it's very difficult. You don't wage war from the House of Representatives. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt didn't wait around in December, and say, gosh, I hope Congress will do something. It'd be nice if they expressed some support. Now, it's the administration that says this is a war. They've said it, the State Department has said it, the Defense Department has said it, the President's laid out how critical this is. Coming and asking for authorization and saying this is what we want is not an unfair thing to do. Strangely enough, this is not a partisan debate at some levels, but so far, again, I don't see why the Speaker should be criticized when he's the only one that's gotten us a vote on anything. Again, if I haven't noticed a statement out of Leader Pelosi saying, I demand that we come back and vote on this. I haven't noticed Harry Reid, who is the majority leader of the United States Senate, saying that. The truth is, and we all know, that they've avoided this issue. They want to avoid it for political reasons. I think we're better served sooner rather than later. I would be delighted if any of the parties concerned would bring Congress back. I think it's an appropriate thing to do.
All right, let's hear from Stacy next in Monticello, Arkansas, independent caller. Hi, Stacy.
Good morning.
Morning.
What I want to know is, okay, they're coming up with the strategy to defeat ISIS in Iraq and Syria. What are they doing about the homegrown terrorists? Because we really can't separate them from everybody else because they look like you and me. I mean, look what's happened in Oklahoma. So what do we do?
Well, I'm very familiar with that event. Sadly, it was in my district, quarter of a mile from where I live. I think we don't know yet the full circumstances there, and I think you need to give law enforcement an opportunity to really look into this. There's no question that this was a very troubled young man, and had been involved in violence before, had been in prison before. This is all pre his conversion to Islam. He hadn't been a convert for a long time. We don't know yet, at least as far as I know, who he was talking to in the social media world. We know he put some awfully provocative and revealing pictures. There's no question that what he did was influenced by what's happening. But there's no evidence that I know of that suggests this was a planned plot or he was other than sort of a copycat actor in this case. But there's a lot more investigations to do there. I do think we're doing quite a lot. As a matter of fact, some of the big debates we've had in Congress in recent years have been, are we doing too much? Are we intruding on people's privacy too much? I think this is a reminder it's a very dangerous world. That's always a tough balance. The balance between security and personal liberty is a real one. It's a continuing debate we ought to have every day in our democracy. But I think so far the fact that we've certainly had terrorist incidents, some near misses, quite frankly, like the Detroit, the Christmas bomber, and situations where the Times Square incident. We've had some of these what appear to be random things, but sometimes connected. The Fort Hood shooting, clearly the perpetrator there was following Islamic jihadist extremist propaganda coming out of Yemen, and that encouraged him to act. So it's a very dangerous thing. But again, I credit our security people, our intelligence people, with having done an amazing job since 9/11, because we've not had another incident of anywhere near that scale. And that suggests to me that, on balance, they've really done a superb job protecting the United States.
Manchester, New Hampshire. Republican Jack is there. Go ahead, Jack.
Yes, Congressman. I find your rationale on why the Congress is sitting there, or actually not even there, but sitting home doing nothing, to be pretty weak. Once again, and surely not for the first time, the Congress of the United States is letting the President of the United States decide whether, when, where, and against whom we should go to war. And then you sit there saying, well, gee, it would be nice if he would ask us to rubber stamp his decision. And, talk about a debate in Congress over this at this point would be a sham. You know that whenever a president decides to go to war, Congress does nothing but click its heels, salute, and say, yes, sir, Mr. President, and we support the troops, and yada, yada, yada. I think it's time Congress reclaimed the authority to go to war. And you have weapons at your disposal to use against the president. Anything from the power of the purse strings to impeachment. I think that Congress should decide whether or not we go to war. And I think you guys have been awfully lax about letting the president usurp your power, basically eat your lunch on that matter. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. First of all, we agree. I couldn't agree with you more. I made this point in Libya. Actually got the only amendment passed that prohibited what we were doing. Couldn't get it through the Senate. I've consistently stated this position. I do think Congress's war-making authority is at stake here. Now, by the way, that's not a new thing. We didn't have a vote to go to war in Korea. We went to war under a UN treaty. That was a much more substantial conflict in terms of loss of life than what we're dealing with now. So, but your basic point is absolutely correct. Now, I would also tell you it's not a slam dunk that presidents get these things. When George H.W. Bush, called Congress back to consider whether or not to engage in the first Gulf War, that was a very close vote. And there was a lot of opposition, including all of the leadership of the Democratic Party at the top. So, I remember the vote very well. I was in D.C., not in Congress at the time. Now, that's been true on a number of these others. And so I don't buy your statement that it would be a sham debate. The debate we had over Syria, 6 hours, I'd advise you to go look at it, wasn't a sham debate. And the vote certainly didn't fall along party lines. Each side had dozens of members who opted against what the president asked for, which was much more limited than airstrikes. I mean, they specifically ruled out action in Syria, just said it was to authorize to train. So, again, I think this is a position that we largely agree in, and I don't disagree with you. I'm disappointed Congress isn't doing this. I'm not sitting here justifying it, quite the opposite. I've been arguing for it for weeks.
Monty on Twitter wants to know, what will a victory on ISIS look like? What do you expect to happen on the ground after victory?
Well, first of all, you would want the Iraqi government, the legitimate government, to reclaim its authority over the whole of Iraq. Right now, a third of that country, an area about the size of Indiana, is under control of a terrorist entity. So first thing, the restoring of legitimate rule over a vast and complex landscape. Second, probably inside Syria, that's tougher. Because what you would want is to get rid of two entities that are actually in deadly competition with one another. We don't like the Assad government. We shouldn't. It killed a lot of Americans, not to mention 200,000 Syrians in the last few years. It's a dangerous, awful group. We wouldn't be there, by the way, if that government could control its own space. As much as we don't like Syria, we didn't cause what happened in Syria. They did. But they've lost control of their territory, and that's the area that ISIL and the Free Syrian Army contest with one another. So it's a very difficult three-way civil war. You would want a more moderate group to emerge, although I'll tell you as an old historian, when you look at a cauldron like this, the idea that moderates survive in the midst of a brutal civil war occurs. I mean, most of the moderates are probably in Jordanian prison camps. Whoever's out there now has been fighting for 3 years on one side or another. And I think they're probably pretty hardened. I don't have any doubt ISIL is the one that's committed the most atrocities, but the Syrian government would be at least a close second. And I doubt everybody in the Free Syrian Army is somebody that you would invite to a Sunday school picnic. I mean, I think it's a pretty tough bunch out there, and we'll probably have to choose between competing bad guys without finding a lot of good guys.
Yeah, Port Richey, Florida. Danny, independent caller.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning. Yes, my favorite politician here is Tom Cole here, and I have a lot of respect for him because at least he's on. He tells it like it is. But what I want to know is who's going to pay for it, and how much more are we going to cut from American? Like all our stuff here. How much stuff are we going to take away from us to pay for these wars? I mean, I think that's a little outrageous anymore. But the bottom line is.
Yeah, Danny, we'll take your point because the congressman serves on the Budget Committee and the Appropriations
I
Committee.
do,
And the headline
you raise a very, very good point.
Yeah, and the headline this morning, just real quickly, the Washington Post says a new report says this Islamic State fight could cost the U.S. billions.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it will do that for certain. Now, again, remember, we're not going to war because we want to go to war. The president didn't seek this war. Nobody sought this war. This is something that has been visited on us and on our people, and where our best security people are telling us this is a clear and present danger that's developing and you need to deal with it sooner rather than later. Now, we can debate that point, but please don't think anybody is rushing into this on any side. Indeed, some of the criticism the president's gotten has been because he hasn't rushed in faster. That's not criticism, by the way, I've joined in. I think, frankly, he may have been a little slow realizing it, but none of us wanted to get into this situation. So we're here. Now, the cost in the short run of arming and training the Syrians, a lot of other countries are going to participate in that. The bases are actually in Saudi Arabia. They've offered to underwrite most of that cost. Training is a lot cheaper than deploying large ground forces, so training and arms, I think we can probably get a coalition to help. European countries have helped. The Germans are actually speaking with the Kurds right now about what they need. They would do that on their own. So I think this will be a more broadly shared cost. The air war so far through the end of the year, we've been able to play by reprogramming costs inside the existing Pentagon budget. But if this goes on, and it will go on, if the aim is to destroy ISIL, I don't know if anybody thinks that can be done in a matter of weeks or months. It may well be a situation that outlasts the president's term. So I think you're wise to ask who we're going to pay for it and whether it's worth the cost. I mean, that's always a fair question in a situation like this. But I think when you balance the danger of a terrorist state in the heart of the Middle East with resources, the ability to plan, the ability to train, you're looking at another 9/11. That's a pretty expensive prospect for the United States, too.
When does it get to the point where you can't reprogram, move around pots of money? When does it get to that point, this fight against ISIS?
Oh, I think, well, the authorization for the president to do this only goes through December 11th. So there's going to have to be additional activity. Now, again, it is so much cheaper to do what we're doing than to put major ground forces into combat and on the ground. So you can go on quite a ways. There is, the Overseas Contingency Operation Fund, which is basically how we fund overseas things. Congress has not settled on a final number there. So we could look at it next year. But again, once you get into a war, the nature of the war, I think, is very unpredictable, and the costs can change. And people can go in thinking it's going to cost one thing, and it costs quite another. That certainly happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. So, again, I think all these questions are good questions. Another reason why I think Congress should be here, we should be having this debate and this discussion, and members ought to have to go home having cast a vote and then justify where they're at in the election and subsequently in future elections. But putting it off, I think, is a mistake.
Steve, Waterbury, Connecticut, Democratic caller.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
I just want to make a couple of comments, and hopefully I have the time to do so. The first comment I would like to make is just to say we need to give this president a little bit of time so we can actually see what his policy is against ISIS. Because I believe with 100% certainty that this ISIS policy is a false flag. The real goal for this president is to overthrow Assad. We are witnessing the beginnings of World War III. And this representative here and the rest of the representatives in Congress should be in The Hague. I am 100% sure that the policy for this president has absolutely nothing to do with ISIS.
Okay, we'll take that point, Steve.
Well, I think the call is right in that the president's ultimate aim, or one of his aims, is certainly to overthrow Assad. I mean, he's been crystal clear about that for a long time, and I certainly agree with him in that. I don't have a disagreement with the president at all. I don't think the ISIL piece of this is simply a ruse or a cover so he can do that. I think it's a threat that probably grew faster than he and many people in our country anticipated it would. I think it's a real and present danger. I don't know anybody that was predicting at the beginning of the summer that ISIL would break out of Syria and take this huge swath of territory. It had been already active again in Iraq, and actually its original roots are in Iraq, and it did early in the summer get Fallujah and Ramadi, places that had been taken and secured by American forces at great cost. Again, I think this is, the president's meeting a danger that wasn't anticipated, or certainly he didn't anticipate, but again, many people didn't anticipate. In terms of going to The Hague, I don't think you really want the Congress of the United States in The Hague. I mean, we don't need 535 secretaries of state. We get them one at a time. The president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, gets to choose who that is. So if we need to speak in an international body, and this is, as the caller suggests, an international coalition and an international issue, then that ought to be appropriately done by both the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary of State.
I think the caller was referring to bringing Congress before The Hague for war crimes.
Well, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, if you can't have it both ways. Congress has either been inactive and has not insisted upon the exercise of its war-making powers. That's where I would come down, or it's been complicit. I don't think it's been both, and I think it's been more prone to duck its responsibilities than to exercise them in some way that would qualify as a war crime.
We'll hear from Mob next in Montgomery, Alabama, independent caller.
Hello.
Morning.
I have a question for the congressman. Y'all just do a lot of unnecessary talking. I don't see what you're on the budget committee, right? So
Correct.
What do you have on the budget that you're going to pay? So you want boots on the ground, and then you confuse people. You got Boehner want boots on the ground. You want boots on the ground. Then you want to point at the president. How much money are you and the Congress going to come up with, and you say it's going to go on forever? What budget do you have? And why don't y'all focus on America and stop focusing over in this other country? You got the Supreme Court yesterday. Stop trying to stop people from voting. Y'all need to stop, both Democrats and Republicans. Take a breath. Come back and talk to the American people. Stop filibustering. Let us talk to you. You stop talking so much and let the people talk to you and tell you all what we want, because that's why we send you there. And you're not doing nothing that the American people want. You're doing what you want to do on y'all committees, because all this information you as Congress people have, y'all got more information than the president do. But then you want to say, you're just like a bully. Put it on him, and then let's not blame ourselves for nothing that's happening, but you're going to put some money on the ground to have a war.
Okay, all right.
Well, a lot to respond to there. First of all, I haven't blamed the president, and haven't tried to, quote, put it on the president. Second, it's the president who came to Congress and said, I want to be able to do these things in Syria. And we tried to work with him on the cost element, and frankly, he's tried to get other people to try and foot that part of it. The president also asked for authority to reprogram money in the existing budget of the Pentagon. He got that authority. So I don't think anybody's trying to put it on him. In terms of speaking with the American people, obviously you don't live in my area, but I have town hall meetings pretty regularly. They go on 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes. And I think I try to stay very closely in touch with my constituents, pretty accessible, pretty visible there, have a pretty good idea, I think, what they think. And if I get too far out of line, they're the ones that rap me on the knuckles and call me up short. And that's the way the system's supposed to work. So I don't represent everybody in America. I represent about 750,000 people in the state of Oklahoma, and My job is to voice their opinions and look after their interests. The other 434 members do the same thing with their constituents.
We'll go to Lori next in Reno, Nevada. Democratic caller. Lori, you're on the air with Congressman Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma.
Congressman
Hi,
Cole.
how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for taking my call. And what I'm trying to do is get Congress and the President together, something that you guys have been separate on this issue about. I would like to get you together and talking. Is your resolution that you're seeking, is that something that is parliamentary procedure only, or is that through the War Powers Act?
Well, I think the most appropriate thing to do, and the President has, look, I'm not trying to be accusatory of the President, but he's at some times when he began this action, it was under the War Powers Act. Then later they sort of slid into the, well, we've always had the authority to do this under the 2001 and 2002 resolutions. And by the way, we have some Republicans that agree with the President on that. Now, I think the better thing, and Senator Kaine, a Democrat from Virginia, has offered this, is let's repeal the 01 and the 02 authorizations and write a new one that very clearly gives the President the authority to act, but might have some limitations on it as well. And certainly a timeline. You know, to me, it's ridiculous for us to be going to war under something that was passed when most members of Congress weren't even here. I wasn't a member of Congress in 01 and 02 when those decisions were made. And they were made about war in Afghanistan and Iraq against a different enemy under different circumstances. So I think we're stretching this a lot, and more than is wise politically. I think the President, too, and maybe this is to your point, would be better off if both sides met, or excuse me, if the Congress met and he got a bipartisan resolution. You would get Republicans and Democrats for the President. You'd get Republicans and Democrats against it or with a different point of view. That's fine, but he would, I think, demonstrate, as the Syrian vote did to me in the House, where a majority of both parties supported the President, you know, that there was genuine bipartisan support for what he was proposing. I just think he's in a stronger position both domestically and internationally if he gets a vote like that. Now, the normal, last point, I'm sorry to take so long, the normal way to get that would be for the President to ask for a resolution of war or a resolution for the authorization of force, if he doesn't want to use those terms. I think he would win that vote. I think he should win that vote. He'd be asked some tough questions about how much, what are you going to do? Some of the very same questions have been posed here today by the callers. And I have no doubt he'd answer those questions to the best of his ability. Now, I also give a president in wartime a lot of latitude because things change. War is not a predictable exercise. He may need to come back and ask for something different later or something additional. Fair enough. But at least we'd have that initial debate and discussion, and we would go into this more or less unified as a country. If we don't do that, I think you'll get partway into it, and it's going to be very difficult for the President to sustain both the domestic and the international support he's going to need to be successful in what's going to be a long slog.
All right, let's go to Little Rock, Arkansas. Anthony is next, an independent caller there. Anthony, good morning.
Good morning. I have a couple comments. Representative Tom Cole, I've watched you for at least 2 years now, and I've always been impressed. I think you're a very fair man, and I actually wish you were Speaker of the House.
Please don't wish that on me.
Well, yeah, but I think you would do a great job.
Thank you.
However, having said that, you spoke about the young man in your hometown who recently committed these atrocities, the beheading. And what I want to suggest is, and the question actually I want to ask is first of all, that young man, there are a couple things about him that are consistent with all of these so-called terrorists around the world. He's uneducated and he's poor. Now, we have a system in our system that perpetuates people not being educated by not investing in public schools. A lot of Republican governors taking money out of public schools, not paying teachers what they're worth. But if you go into the more affluent communities, you see that they have better educational system. Teachers are paid more. Kids are being educated. So we're creating a system where these folks, like recently in Ferguson, you had the rioting, or you can point to any other riot. The people that are rioting are poor and they're uneducated. So it's basically consistent throughout the world. It's just that here it's not as bad as it is in those other places. Otherwise, we would probably have the same situation. But we're creating this as a nation for ourselves, and it's unsustainable.
Okay. Congressman?
Well, a lot of good points there. I don't want to get drawn into the debate over every state educational system because, frankly, I'm not knowledgeable about them beyond my own state. But I will say this, the education is one of those areas where you almost can never spend enough, but you ought to recognize how much we do spend. The United States spends more per capita than any country in the world. It's a huge percentage of most state governments' budgets, much smaller at the federal level, quite frankly, but still substantial. So I think there is a real resource commitment there. I also, while I agree with your caller's point that poverty and lack of opportunity in education are contributors to a lot of bad things, a lot of behavior that all of us would condemn. People are hopeless, they do desperate things. That's not the sole or even the main root of terrorism, in my view, in the Middle East. I mean, there's a lot of awfully well-educated and rich terrorists. For instance, Osama bin Laden was extremely well-educated and very wealthy. And a lot of the people that underwrite those movements in the Middle East are fabulously wealthy by anybody's standards. So I think there's something a lot more complex here. There's an ideology, a worldview that makes the use of terrorism an acceptable tool. I think a lot of governments in that region have used that tool thinking they could control it and direct it out. They've found that it blows back and comes into their own societies. So I don't think it's simply a lack of opportunity. We have a lack of opportunity in lots of areas of the world where we don't have this kind of violence and, or at least it doesn't express itself in this way. But your basic point is, should we be better off investing in young people and creating opportunities and educating? Absolutely true. No question about that.
We'll go to Las Vegas. Dave is up early there. Democratic caller.
Good morning.
Morning.
Yeah, I like to say before we rush into sending ground troops in there, consider how effective our current air power can be with the precision-guided munitions we have. And I will give two examples from the recent past, one being under President Clinton, the war in Kosovo, where we engaged in air power only, achieved all of our goals with zero combat casualties. Second would be first Gulf War under President Herbert Walker Bush. Yes, we sent ground troops there, but he engaged in a bombing campaign for a couple of months first, and by the time our troops went in, 120,000 Iraqis surrendered immediately. So I think we should do the air power first and then see what things look like once the dust settles down.
I think your caller's absolutely right. And I think those are two excellent examples. I do think, again, ground forces were critical in the first Gulf War. The threat of them were critical in Kosovo. But again, I'm not complaining because the president has been hesitant to do this. I mean, I think there's abundant reason to be cautioned. On the other hand, I have been critical because I think he's ruled things out that he may later, be forced to do. What's happened over the last month, look, we were calling ISIL the junior varsity earlier this year. That's the president's term. And we were saying you couldn't build up the Syrians 6 weeks ago. The president said, "No, that's a fool's errand, can never happen." Now that's a strategy. So we'd probably be better off just simply not ruling things in and out, not telling our adversaries what we won't do, and frankly not assuring the American people we're not going to do something and then maybe doing it later. I think that's what gets us into trouble. And I don't think the president's alone in that. I'm not trying to single him out, but I just think if this is indeed as serious a threat as our national leadership think it is, and I agree with them in that, then you ought to have all the tools in the toolbox. But if, as the caller suggests, you can do it without putting people on the ground, so much the better. If other people can perform that task on the ground instead of us, again, so much the better. And those are worthy things to try and do. If we get to the point, though, that we decide it hasn't worked, but it's still in the national interest to do something, I think the president ought to have those options available to him.
Let me bring up another issue, and that's the Democratic protesters in Hong Kong. Here's a piece written this morning in the Wall Street Journal, op-ed page. It's written by a human rights lawyer, a Chinese human rights lawyer, who writes that tear gas and pepper spray hint at worse to come. The White House must issue a clear warning to Beijing.
Well, I think probably that's correct. On the other hand, what's a clear warning to Beijing? Look, I'm not surprised that it's a totalitarian state, and that's what China is using totalitarian methods. It's sad but true that inside their territory, they have the authority and the power to do this, and we probably don't have the ability in any meaningful way to contest them. I suppose we could talk about economic sanctions or what have you. At the end of the day, I mean, I think we're all on the side of the protesters in Hong Kong. Things succeed there. But again, there's a limit to what the president can do, and it's a pretty dangerous world out there right now. We have enough to deal with the Russians in Ukraine, with ISIL, with Pakistan developing second strike nuclear capability, with a guy in North Korea that we don't know what he's going to do when he gets up any morning. His own uncle didn't know what he was going to do when he got up one morning. It's a pretty dangerous world. So. Gratuitously picking fights with people is something that I would try to avoid. I think the president has tried to avoid.
Gil, Jamestown, North Carolina, Democratic caller.
Yes, good morning, and thanks so much for taking my call. Congressman Cole, I do agree, and I'm in agreement with you that a reauthorization or a authorization under the War Powers Act should take place after December the 11th. The question that I wanted to ask you is this. Would you vote for an increase in taxes to pay for this continuation? And the reason I say this is that Ms. Bronner had mentioned in the previous hour that the cost, if a reauthorization took place, was going to be on the average of $2 to $6 billion a month. And then secondarily, since this is a regional conflict which impacts the countries of Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, and Turkey, where Jordan and Turkey are now receiving thousands upon thousands of refugees, if this authorization takes place, that the 4 countries that I just mentioned should be a part of that coalition. And if they decide not to be a part of that coalition, I think we should cut off funding to those 4 countries.
Okay, Gil, this is a headline from NPR that Turkey signals its willingness to join the coalition against ISIS, one of the countries that he mentioned. Go ahead, Congressman.
Yeah, I was going to say, so far, all but Turkey have participated. You have to look at what their means are. Saudi Arabia is enormously wealthy and can participate, and undoubtedly will. At least that's the assurances we've been given, is going to pay for a considerable part of the cost of the training. A number of these countries put planes in the air with our planes over Syria recently. The Jordanians, probably our best allies in the region and the Arab world, country of limited means and enormously strained by the influx of refugees. Same Turkey, again, that's a very robust, big economy. We actually do have forces. We have an air base in Turkey. We have Patriot missile batteries, actually from my district and from Fort Sill, Oklahoma. They're deployed right now defending Turkish airspace to keep the Syrian civil war from spilling over there. And again, this is a longtime ally of the United States, a NATO ally. We don't always agree on everything, but generally they've been helpful to us. And I think now that they've got their people back, their diplomats who were being held hostage, will probably be in a position to do more. Your question on the taxation issue is a great question. Now, I point with considerable pride that since Republican majorities come in, the deficit's gone down from $1.4 trillion, where it was 4 years ago, to probably just under $500 billion this year. A lot will depend on what the nature of the conflict is. If it's as the president envisions it to be, you're probably not going to need that. I mean, again, we've had increasing revenue and decreasing expenditures for a number of years. So I'm not sure that you're going to require tax increase. What I will do, tell you, is I would vote, as I have, for long-term entitlement reform. That's the real driver of the budget deficit, frankly, or the entitlement programs here. Those are tough votes to cast, but I think that's where the savings need to come from. But if you have to have additional revenue to defend the country, then you get additional revenue to defend the country.
Real quick, campaign 2014, around the corner, 35 days to go. Democratic Congressman Steny Hoyer, number 2 in the House, said yesterday here in Washington, if Democrats control the House, one of the first things they'll do is they'll act on immigration, which Republicans have not.
Well, it's an easy thing to say because they're not going to control the House. And, I mind my good friend, Mr. Hoyer, they did have the House for 4 years, never brought an immigration bill to the floor, ever. The President of the United States ran in 2008 saying he would have an immigration bill within 100 days. Never did it. So I think the best way to proceed, we have 4 bills that have passed Judiciary Committee now that would be step by step. The fear is if you pass them, you send them to the Senate, it attaches something much bigger and sends it back to the House, and you're in a political free-for-all. But again, my friends talking about dealing with a problem that they didn't deal with when they were in the majority is somewhat not, is less than convincing to me.
All right. Well, Representative Tom Cole, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for talking to our viewers.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we're going to talk